They mocked her tiny inheritance, until she opened the hidden compartment in the workshop. What she found inside wasn't just about money, it was about a truth that had been buried for 18 years, and a choice that would redefine her entire life. If you've ever felt underestimated or alone, stick with me. This story is for you. And if it resonates, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who've had to fight for their own story. The bus seat vibrated with a low, weary hum that had worked its way into my bones hours ago. Outside, the world was a smear of gray slush and skeletal trees. It was my 18th birthday. No cake, no candles, just a rumbling engine carrying me away from the only life I'd ever known. 2 years at the Mattingly Group Home for Girls. 4 years in foster care before that. A decade of being a file in a cabinet, a name on a list, a problem to be managed until the clock ran out. Today, the clock ran out. My worldly possessions fit into a single cardboard box on the seat beside me. A few worn paperbacks, a change of clothes, and a faded photograph of a man with kind eyes and sawdust in his hair. My grandfather, the man who, according to the state of Pennsylvania, had abandoned me when I was a baby. In my pocket was a letter, the paper thin and important feeling. It had arrived a week ago, addressed to Clara Vance, care of the state. It was from a law office in a town I'd never heard of, 300 miles north. The letter was brief. It informed me that upon my 18th birthday, I was to be the sole beneficiary of the estate of Elias Vance. My presence was requested to discuss the matter. Estate. The word sounded grand, like something from one of my books. It conjured images of sprawling manors and hidden fortunes. But the social worker, Mrs. Gable, had looked at the letterhead with a tired pity in her eyes. "Don't get your hopes up, Clara," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, a tone designed to manage expectations and prevent emotional fallout. Sometimes estate just means debt. The bus groaned to a halt in a small, forgotten-looking town square. A single traffic light blinked yellow into the falling snow. I stepped out into the biting cold, pulling my thin jacket tighter. The lawyer's office was exactly as I'd pictured, a small, dusty storefront with gold lettering peeling from the glass. Davies and Son, attorneys at law. There was no son in sight, only a man who looked like he'd been born behind his mahogany desk. Mr. Davies was old, with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that held the same weary resignation as Mrs. Gable's. He didn't stand when I entered. He just gestured to the cracked leather chair opposite him. "Clara Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. "You have your grandfather's eyes." He sighed, shuffling a thin file on his desk. "I was his lawyer, and his father's before him. The Vances have been in Stone Creek for a long time." He paused, looking at me over his spectacles. "Your grandfather, Elias, he was a good man, a fine carpenter. The best in the county." I clutched the strap of my bag, saying nothing. I had learned long ago that saying nothing was usually the safest option. People projected onto your silence whatever they wanted to see. Mr. Davies took my silence as an invitation to continue. "His estate is modest," he said, choosing the word carefully. "He left you his property, the workshop specifically. It's on the old Vance plot, about 2 miles out of town." He pushed a large, yellowed envelope across the desk. I could see deeds and official-looking documents through the brittle cellophane window. He also left a considerable amount of debt. Property taxes, mostly. They haven't been paid in years. My stomach, already a tight knot of anxiety, clenched harder. Mrs. Gable had been right. Estate meant debt. The structure itself is in a state of severe disrepair. The township has condemned it, in fact. They'll tear it down in 6 months if the taxes aren't paid and the building isn't brought up to code. He let that hang in the air, the sentence of my inheritance. A condemned building and a pile of debt. It wasn't just a disappointment, it felt like a joke. A final, cruel punchline from a life that had been full of them. I had imagined, in some foolish, secret part of my heart, that this might be a beginning. a key, a deed, a small savings account. Something to prove I wasn't completely alone, that someone, somewhere, had thought of me. Instead, I had been handed a burden, a bill, a final confirmation of my worthlessness. Now, Mr. Davies continued, seemingly oblivious to the collapse of my fragile hope, there is one small bit of good news. We have a standing offer on the property. He pulled out another, crisper envelope. A developer, Northridge Holdings, has been trying to acquire the parcels on that side of the mountain for a new resort project. They've made an offer for your grandfather's land. He slid a single sheet of paper towards me. I looked at the number. $5,000. After the back taxes and my legal fees are settled, he said, his voice flat, you'd walk away with about $800. $800. Enough for a bus ticket to somewhere warmer and a month's rent on a room in a place I didn't know. It was a parachute, not a foundation. It was an escape, not a home. The system had mocked me with its version of freedom, and now my own family history was mocking me with this pathetic inheritance. They just want the land, then? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The workshop is worthless to them? Less than worthless, Mr. Davies corrected gently. They'll have to pay to demolish it. The offer is for the acreage, small as it is. He leaned back, his chair creaking in protest. My advice, Miss Vance, for what it's worth, is to take the offer. Sign the papers, take the check, and start fresh somewhere new. There's nothing for you here in Stone Creek. Nothing but ghosts and cold winters. His advice was sensible. It was logical. It was what any sane person would do. Mrs. Gable would tell me to do it. The state would approve. It was the clean break everyone always said I needed. But as I looked at the offer from Northridge Holdings, a cold, unfamiliar feeling stirred in my gut. It felt like anger. My grandfather, the man with the kind eyes in the photo, was a master carpenter. He built things. He didn't leave behind collapsing shacks and meaningless debt. The file they had on him, the one Mrs. Gable had let me read, said he was neglectful, that he had a criminal record for assault, that he'd disappeared without a trace. It never felt right. None of it. And this offer, this insulting, dismissive offer to bulldoze his life's work for pocket change, felt like the final lie in a long series of them. I looked at Mr. Davies. I want to see it, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. The workshop. I want to see it before I decide. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something. Surprise? Interest? In his tired eyes. He sighed again, a long, drawn-out sound of resignation. Suit yourself, he said, pushing a rusty iron key across the desk. It's 2 miles down Old Hemlock Road. Can't miss it. Sits in the shadow of the mountain. Just be careful. The floorboards aren't safe in places. He didn't offer me a ride. He didn't ask if I had a place to stay. The transaction was, for all intents and purposes, complete. I was no longer his problem. I was a file to be closed. I took the key. It was heavy and cold in my palm, a solid, real piece of a life I'd never been allowed to know. I stood up, the cardboard box under my arm, the key clutched in my fist. Outside, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the forgotten town in a silent shroud of white. I had no money for a cab, no one to call. I had a key, a destination, and a flicker of stubborn defiance that felt, for the first time in my life, entirely my own. I started walking. The 2-mile walk felt more like 10. The snow was deep on the unplowed road, soaking through my thin sneakers until my toes were numb. The wind cut through my jacket, sharp and unforgiving. The sun was a pale, disinterested disk behind a thick veil of gray cloud. Old Hemlock Road wound its way out of the town's small cluster of buildings and into the woods. The trees, heavy with snow, crowded the road, their branches forming a dark, skeletal canopy overhead. It was silent, except for the crunch of my own footsteps and the whistle of the wind. I felt a profound, crushing loneliness, the kind that feels like a physical weight on your chest. I was 18 years old, and I was walking toward a ruin I owned in a place I didn't belong. This wasn't freedom. This was exile. I nearly missed it. The workshop was set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown pines and drifts of snow. It was worse than Mr. Davies had described. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Several windows were boarded up. The glass in the others was shattered. The wood of the walls was weathered to a silver gray, warped and splintered. It looked less like a building and more like a ghost, a memory of a building that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. A faded, hand-carved sign still hung crookedly over the large double doors. Vance & Son, Fine Woodworking, established 1948. The son was my grandfather, Elias. My heart ached. This place had a history, my history, and it was being left to rot. The large padlock on the doors was rusted solid. I fumbled with the iron key Mr. Davies had given me, my fingers stiff and clumsy with cold. It was for the smaller side door. The lock was stiff, but with a painful screech of protest, it turned. The door swung inward into darkness. I hesitated on the threshold, a wave of cold, musty air washing over me. It smelled of damp earth, rotting wood, and something else, something faint and evocative underneath it all. Sawdust, linseed oil, and pine. It was the scent of creation. It was the scent of my grandfather. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, out of the snow and into the past. The interior of the workshop was vast and cavernous, much larger than it appeared from the outside. The air was frigid, colder even than it was outdoors. The only light came from the few intact windows, casting long, dusty beams across the cluttered space. It was a cathedral of forgotten work. Long workbenches lined the walls, covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. Tools, rusted and silent, lay where they had been set down years ago, as if their owner had just stepped out for a moment. I saw hand planes, chisels of every size, saws hanging from pegs on the wall like dormant animals. Stacks of lumber, gray with age, leaned against the far wall, waiting for a hand that would never return. In the center of the room stood a massive lathe, a complex beast of iron and steel shrouded in a canvas tarp. It was a mess, but it wasn't a junk pile. It was an organized chaos, the workspace of a man who knew where everything was. I ran my gloved hand over the surface of the nearest workbench, disturbing the dust of nearly 2 decades. Beneath it, the wood was smooth, worn down by years of labor. The surface was scarred with the marks of errant saw cuts and chisel slips, each one a tiny story. I could almost see him standing here, the man from the photograph, his brow furrowed in concentration, shavings of wood clinging to his flannel shirt. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it stole my breath, washed over me. This was his place. This was his life. And I had never known him. The state had told me he was a monster who left his family. The file said he was a criminal. But this place told a different story. This was the sanctuary of a creator, an artist. I spent the next hour just walking, exploring the space. I moved carefully, testing the floorboards before putting my full weight on them, just as Mr. Davies had warned. Snow had drifted in through the broken windows, creating small, white dunes in the corners of the room. I found half-finished projects. A child's rocking horse, its head beautifully carved but not yet attached to the body. A set of intricate cabinetry doors, one of which was missing its final sanding. It was like a museum of interruption. I felt like an archaeologist, uncovering a life frozen in time. Why did he leave? Why did he leave all this? The official story felt thinner than ever, a flimsy narrative that couldn't possibly contain the truth of this place. My box of belongings felt flimsy and insignificant in this vast, history-soaked room. I set it down on a workbench, next to a row of wooden mallets. I was cold, I was hungry, and I was completely, utterly lost. The sensible thing to do was to walk back to town, find Mr. Davies, sign the papers, and take the $800. I could be on a bus heading south by morning, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Leaving felt like a betrayal. It felt like agreeing with the world that all of this, that he, was worthless. I had to know more. I owed him that much. I owed myself that much. I started to search, not for anything valuable, but for anything personal. A letter, a journal, another photograph, anything that might hold a clue. I checked the drawers of the workbenches. They were filled with more tools, with screws and nails sorted into old coffee cans, with sketches of furniture on yellowed graph paper. It was all work. His life seemed to be nothing but work. Then I saw it. The main workbench, the largest one, sat directly under the best-preserved window. It was clearly his primary station. It was made of thick, heavy maple, its legs as thick as tree trunks. It was a masterpiece in itself. Unlike the others, its surface was almost clear, save for a single, small, locked wooden box. But that wasn't what caught my eye. Along the front apron of the workbench was a series of decorative wooden dowels, set in a simple pattern. They looked like they were part of the construction, a flourish of craftsmanship. But one of them, a single oak dowel, was a slightly different color than the rest. It was darker, richer. My heart started to beat a little faster. I reached out and touched it. It was smooth, just like the others. I tried to pull it. Nothing. I tried to twist it. It moved. With a soft, wooden click, it turned a quarter of an inch to the right. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a quiet groan of old wood, a section of the workbench's front panel, a piece I hadn't even realized was a separate panel, dropped open on a hidden hinge. It wasn't a drawer. It was a compartment. A secret compartment built so seamlessly into the bench that it was practically invisible. My breath caught in my throat. My hands were trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from a dizzying mix of fear and hope. I knelt down, peering into the dark space. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, clean rags, were two things. The first was a thick, canvas bank bag, the kind with a drawstring. It was heavy. The second was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. My name, Clara, was written on the top envelope in a strong, clear script. I reached in with a shaky hand and lifted the bundle of letters out. I untied the twine. The top letter was sealed. I opened it, my fingers fumbling with the paper. Inside was a single, folded sheet. I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Clara," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are finally 18. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I know what they told you. I know they said I left you, that I didn't want you. It is the greatest lie of my life, and the one that has caused me the most pain." My eyes filled with tears, blurring the words. I wiped them away with the back of my frozen hand and kept reading. "I did not abandon you, my girl. I was forced away. I made a powerful enemy, a company that wanted this land, our land. They couldn't get it from me legally, so they decided to get it from me another way. They framed me. They manufactured an assault charge, paid a man to lie. I was facing years in prison. My lawyer, a young Mr. Davies who was not as wise then as he may be now, told me my best option was to run, to disappear. If I stayed, you would have been taken by the state anyway, and I would have been in a cage, useless to you. So I ran. It broke my heart, but I did it to protect you. I thought I could clear my name from a distance and come back for you. I was wrong. They were too powerful. Their lies became the official story, and I could never come home." I had to stop reading. A sob escaped my throat, a raw, ragged sound in the silent workshop. All the years of feeling unwanted, of believing I was the daughter of a man who hadn't cared enough to stay, it all crumbled in an instant. It was a lie. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me. The weight of that revelation was staggering. It recontextualized every lonely night, every bitter thought, every ounce of shame I had carried for my entire life. I wasn't abandoned. I was loved. I picked up the canvas bag. It was heavy, and it clinked. Not with coins. I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto the workbench. It was cash. Rolls of 20s and 50s, bound with rubber bands. I didn't count it, but I knew it was a lot. More money than I had ever seen in my life. I looked back at the letter. In the bag is everything I saved. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough to give you a start. Enough to pay the taxes on this place and fix the roof if you choose. Or enough to go wherever you want and build a new life. The choice is yours, Clara. But know this. This workshop is more than just a building. It's our legacy. And it holds more secrets. The truth of what happened to me is here, hidden in the bones of this place. The answer to everything is here. Don't trust the developers. Don't trust their offers. Trust the workshop. It will tell you what you need to know. Be safe, my girl. Know that I loved you every single day. Your grandfather, Elias. I sat there on the dusty floor of the collapsing workshop, my grandfather's letter in one hand and a bag of money in the other, and I cried. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the man I never knew. I cried for the lonely little girl who had believed she was unlovable. And I cried for the young woman I was now, sitting on the precipice of a choice that felt impossibly large. The $800 from Mr. Davies felt like a distant, insulting memory. This money, this letter, this was my real inheritance. It wasn't just cash. It was truth. It was a mission. It was a chance to reclaim a story that had been stolen from us. The anger I had felt earlier returned, but now it was sharper, honed to a fine point. The company, Northridge Holdings, they hadn't just made a lowball offer on a piece of land. They had destroyed my family. They had stolen my grandfather from me. They had orchestrated the entire lonely tragedy of my childhood. And they were still circling, like vultures, waiting to pick the last meat from the bones of my family's legacy. Mr. Davies's advice to run, to start fresh, now sounded like cowardice. Running was what they wanted. They wanted me to be a scared, ignorant girl who would take their pittance and disappear, just like they had made my grandfather disappear. They were counting on me not to know the truth, but now I did. Or at least, I knew the beginning of it. I looked around the workshop again, but this time, I saw it differently. It wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a fortress. It was a puzzle box. It was the last thing my grandfather had touched, the place where he had hidden his love and his truth for me to find. Trust the workshop, he had written. And I would. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was not leaving. This wasn't just a property anymore. It was home. It was the only home I had ever truly had, and I would not let them take it. You know, if you've made it this far into my story, something in it must be speaking to you. Maybe it's the feeling of being misjudged, of having your story told for you by people who don't know you. Maybe it's the struggle to find your place in a world that seems to have already decided who you are. If that's you, I want you to know you're not alone. The comments on these stories are filled with people who get it. It's a community. So take a second and just let me know if this is hitting home. It means a lot to know who's listening. Now, let's get back to that workshop. My first decision was practical. I couldn't stay in the workshop as it was. I would freeze to death. I counted the money. There was just over $30,000. It felt like an impossible sum. I carefully bundled most of it back into the canvas bag and tucked it deep inside my own box, hiding it under my books. I kept a few $100s in my pocket. My next stop was the town. I walked the 2 miles back, but this time the journey felt different. The cold was still sharp, but my loneliness had been replaced by a quiet, burning sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of my story. I was about to become its author. Stone Creek's Main Street had a hardware store, a small grocery, and a diner. I went to the hardware store first. A bell chimed as I entered, and an old man with a friendly, wrinkled face looked up from his newspaper. "Help you?" he asked. "I need a heavy-duty tarp, some thick plastic sheeting, work gloves, a good lantern, and some propane canisters," I said, the list forming in my head as I spoke. He nodded slowly, taking me in, the cheap jacket, the wet sneakers, the determined look in my eyes. "Fixing something up?" he asked, his tone casual. "The old Vance workshop," I said. His eyes widened slightly. "Elias's place? Honey, that place is one good storm away from falling down." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm starting with the roof." He looked at me for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "You must be his granddaughter," he said. "Heard you were in town. You've got his stubborn chin." He led me through the aisles, helping me pick out exactly what I needed. At the counter, he threw in a heavy-duty flashlight for free. "Call it a welcome-to-town gift," he said. "Good to see a Vance back in that workshop. Your grandfather was a hell of a man, a true artist with wood." His words were like a balm on a wound I hadn't known was still so raw. Someone remembered him. Someone remembered him for who he was, not for the lies they'd told. My next stop was the grocery store for food that wouldn't spoil: canned soup, crackers, jerky, bottled water. Then I bought a warm, insulated sleeping bag and a small foam mat from a sporting goods section. Loaded with supplies, I walked back to the workshop, my third trip of the day. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered trees in shades of orange and pink. As I approached the workshop, it looked different again. Less like a ghost, more like a sleeping giant. My responsibility. The first task was to secure a space to live. I chose a small, enclosed room off the main workshop floor that must have been an office. Its one window was shattered, but the walls and ceiling were mostly intact. I spent the next 2 hours tacking up the thick plastic sheeting over the window frame and over the doorway, creating an airlock against the bitter cold. Then, I set up the propane heater. A welcome hiss filled the small space, and slowly, miraculously, the biting chill began to retreat. It wasn't warm, but it was no longer dangerously cold. I laid out my sleeping bag and foam mat on the floor. It was the most pathetic-looking home I'd ever had. And yet, it felt more mine than any foster bedroom or group home bunk ever had. For the next week, I fell into a routine. I woke up with the sun, ate a cold breakfast, and then I began to work. My first project was the workshop itself. It was too big of a task to fix everything at once, so I focused on one thing: cleaning. I started in one corner and began the painstaking process of sorting, cleaning, and organizing. It was my way of getting to know my grandfather. Every tool I picked up, I cleaned the rust from. Every stack of wood, I restacked. Every jar of screws, I sorted. With every object I touched, I felt a connection to him. I was retracing the steps of his life, feeling the weight of the tools he held, seeing the plans he drew. And as I cleaned, I searched. I looked for more hidden compartments, more loose floorboards, more signs of something deliberately concealed. "Trust the workshop," his letter had said. It had to mean more than just the one compartment. The building itself was the key. Days turned into a week, then 2. I made trips into town for more supplies, for propane, for food. I saw the hardware store owner, who always gave me a nod of encouragement. I started to feel like a part of the town, a strange, solitary part, but a part nonetheless. I felt my body getting stronger from the physical labor. My hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. But I found nothing. No more letters, no more secrets. The doubt began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Was the first letter the only thing he had left? Was I just a crazy girl cleaning a ruin, chasing a ghost? The pressure from the outside world hadn't stopped. Mr. Davies called me on a cheap pay-as-you-go phone I had bought. "Clara," he said, his voice tinny and strained. "Northridge Holdings has increased their offer. 7,000 now. They also sent a formal notice. They're prepared to petition the court to have the property declared a public hazard and seized by the township for demolition if the back taxes aren't paid by the end of the month." The threat was clear. They were done waiting. They were starting to push. "Pay the taxes," I told him. "Use the money from the estate." I couldn't tell him about the cash. Not yet. There was a moment of silence on the line. "Clara, that's thousands of dollars," he said. "It's a waste of money on a condemned building." "It's not a waste," I said, my voice firm. "It's my property. Pay the taxes." He sighed, that familiar, weary sound. "As you wish," he said, and hung up. That night, a snowstorm blew in, a blizzard that shook the old workshop to its foundations. The wind howled through the broken windows, and I could hear the groaning of the old timbers. I lay in my sleeping bag in my little plastic-draped room, listening to the storm, feeling a deep, gnawing despair. I was running out of time. I was cleaning and searching and hoping, but I was finding nothing. Maybe Mr. Davies was right. Maybe I was just wasting time and money chasing a fantasy. Maybe my grandfather's letter was just the rambling of a man broken by injustice, a final, hopeful wish with no substance behind it. The next morning, the world was silent, buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The storm had done more damage. A section of the main roof had finally given way, and a huge pile of snow sat in the middle of the workshop floor, melting into a growing puddle. That was it. I had to deal with the roof. I spent the morning clearing the new snow, then dragged a tall, rickety ladder to the spot. I needed to get the massive tarp I had bought over the hole to prevent more water damage. As I was clearing debris near the collapsed section, I noticed something. The collapse had exposed a network of heavy ceiling joists, and tucked between 2 of them, almost completely hidden from below, was a long metal tube, the kind architects use for blueprints. It was covered in dust and cobwebs. It had been placed there deliberately, high up in the rafters, a place no one would ever look unless the roof itself came down. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This had to be it. With trembling hands, I climbed the ladder, stretching to reach the tube. My fingers brushed against it. It was cold and solid. I carefully worked it free and carried it down the ladder as if it were a holy relic. I took it to my small, heated room and sat on my sleeping bag, the tube across my lap. It took me a few minutes to work the cap off. It was sealed tight. When it finally came loose, I tilted the tube, and a thick, rolled-up sheaf of papers slid out, along with something else that landed on my sleeping bag with a soft thud. It was a small, old-fashioned cassette tape. I unrolled the papers first. They weren't woodworking plans. They were geological surveys, mineral assays, and topographical maps of the Vance property and the surrounding mountain. They were covered in handwritten notes and calculations. I didn't understand all the technical jargon, but I understood enough. Words like high-purity silica, quartz vein, and piezoelectric properties jumped out at me. My grandfather hadn't just been a carpenter. He had been a prospector. He had been studying the rock under his own feet. Tucked into the middle of the surveys was a final, multi-page letter. "Clara," it began, "if you found this, it means you've been listening to the workshop. It means you are as stubborn and clever as your grandmother always was. I hope you found the money. I hope it has kept you safe. Now, it's time for the whole truth. What I am giving you now is not money. It is a weapon. Our land, Clara, is not just dirt and trees. Deep beneath the workshop runs a vein of quartz unlike any other in this country. It's almost perfectly pure. In the 90s, when personal computers and electronics started to boom, I realized what we were sitting on. This kind of quartz is essential for making processors, semiconductors. It's worth millions. Not to a man like me, but to a corporation. I tried to find a partner, to mine it responsibly, to bring jobs to Stone Creek, which was already dying. That's when Northridge Holdings showed up. They're not developers, Clara. They're a front for a massive electronics corporation. They didn't want a partner. They wanted it all. They made me a lowball offer, the kind they're probably making you right now. I refused. So they decided to take it. They ruined my reputation. They manufactured the criminal charge. They ran me out of my home, off my own land, away from my family. They thought if they waited long enough, the property would fall into the hands of the state or an heir who knew nothing, and they could snap it up for pennies on the dollar. They were counting on you. These documents are the proof. My original survey, my core samples, my correspondence with geologists before Northridge scared them all off. This is the truth of what this land is worth. But it's your choice what to do with it. You can use it to expose them. You can use it to negotiate a fair price. You can use it to finally get justice for what they did to our family. The cassette tape, that's for you alone. It's my last will and testament, in a way. Listen to it when you are ready. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. You are a Vance. We don't break, we build. Your loving grandfather, Elias. I sat in stunned silence, the papers spread out around me. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just about a small injustice. It was a corporate conspiracy that had spanned 2 decades. They had played the long game, patiently waiting for the inconvenient old carpenter to die and his ignorant heir to show up. They had mocked me with their $7,000 offer for a piece of land that was worth millions, maybe tens of millions. The anger I felt was cold and pure. It was the anger of generational injustice. But underneath it was a deep, swelling sense of pride. My grandfather hadn't been a victim. He had been a fighter. He had lost the battle, but he had hidden the weapons for me to win the war. I needed a cassette player. It was an absurd, archaic thought. I bundled up and walked back into town, my mind racing. The hardware store owner saw me from across the street. "Still at it," he called out. "Making progress," I yelled back, a real smile on my face for the first time in days. I found what I was looking for in a small antique shop, a dusty, portable cassette player with a pair of flimsy headphones. I bought it and a pack of fresh batteries and hurried back to the workshop, to my small, safe room. With trembling hands, I put the cassette in, pressed the play button, and put the headphones on. And then, for the first time in 17 years, I heard my grandfather's voice. It was deep and calm, but with an undercurrent of sorrow that was almost unbearable. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice crackling slightly with the age of the tape. "If you're hearing this, then I guess my time ran out. I always hoped I'd be able to give this to you in person, to tell you the story myself." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to travel across the years and settle in my own chest. "There's not much more to say about the company, about the land. The papers tell that story. This is about you." He paused, and I could hear the sound of him gathering his thoughts. "I want you to know about the rocking horse. The one in the main room. I started carving it the day you were born. I was going to give it to you for your first birthday. It was going to be the most beautiful thing I ever made. When they forced me to leave, I couldn't bring myself to finish it. And I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It's still there, waiting. Just like I waited. Hoping." Tears streamed down my face, silent and hot. I could picture him, alone in this workshop, recording this message into a cheap cassette player, his last act of love and defiance. "What they did to me," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't just about greed. It was about crushing a man's spirit. They wanted to make me feel small, powerless. And for a long time they succeeded. But then I would think of you. I would think about the world you were growing up in, and I knew I couldn't just let them win. I couldn't give you a fortune, Clara. Money comes and goes, but I could give you the truth. I could give you a choice. That's a better inheritance than money, I think. The power to choose your own path. So, here's your choice. Mr. Davies can take this evidence and get you a settlement. They'll pay millions to keep this quiet. You could be set for life. You could walk away from Stone Creek, from all this pain, and never look back. No one would blame you. Lord knows you deserve an easy life after the one you've had. But there's another choice. You can fight them. You can bring it all out into the open. It will be ugly. They will drag my name, our name, through the mud all over again. They'll say I was a disgruntled criminal. They'll try to make you look like a greedy, opportunistic liar. It will be a long, hard, painful fight. And you might not even win. But you will have stood for the truth. You will have cleared my name. And you will have shown them that advance doesn't just get pushed aside. He took a shaky breath. Whatever you do, I'll be proud of you. But I hope you fight. I hope you finish the work I started. This town, Stone Creek, it's dying. A responsible project here, one that shares the profits with the community, could save it. That was always my dream. To build something that lasts. Not just furniture, but a future. His voice dropped to a whisper. I love you, Clara. Never forget that. The tape clicked, and then there was only the soft hiss of empty tape. I sat there for a long time, the headphones still on, the silence of the workshop pressing in on me. The choice he had laid out was so clear, so stark. The easy wrong or the harder right. A life of quiet comfort, bought with silence, or a life of struggle, fought for truth. For 17 years, all I had ever wanted was an easy life. A safe, quiet, untroubled existence. But listening to his voice, feeling the weight of his sacrifice, I knew that wasn't me anymore. He hadn't raised a daughter who would take the money and run. He had raised a granddaughter who would finish the fight. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Davies. Clara, he answered, his voice sounding surprised. I need to see you, I said. I'm coming to your office now, and you're going to want to cancel your afternoon appointments. There was a new tone in my voice, one I had never heard before. It was the sound of certainty. I walked the 2 miles to town one last time as a lost girl. I carried the metal tube with its precious contents under my arm. The world was still white and cold, but for the first time, I could see a path forward, a clear, bright line through the snow. When I walked into his office, he looked up with that same tired expression. But when I placed the tube on his desk and started to unroll the geological surveys, his expression began to change. I watched the weariness in his eyes burn away, replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. I didn't say much. I just handed him the cassette player and the tape. Listen to this, I said. It's my grandfather's will. He took it, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked at me with something that resembled respect. I'll be back in an hour, I said. We have a lawsuit to file. The aftermath was exactly as my grandfather predicted. It was a storm. Northridge Holdings, through a team of slick, expensive lawyers, denied everything. They painted Elias Vance as an unstable, disgruntled trespasser on his own land, a man with a violent past who had concocted a fantasy of mineral wealth. They painted me as a gullible, greedy opportunist, coached by a small-town lawyer looking for a payday. But they couldn't explain away the surveys. They couldn't refute the detailed, scientific notes my grandfather had kept for years. And they couldn't erase his voice from that tape. Mr. Davies, who I discovered was not tired but simply bored, came alive. He found the original arresting officer, now retired, who confessed that the assault had always felt flimsy, pushed by powerful people. He found geologists willing to testify to the validity of my grandfather's findings. The local newspaper, and then a regional one, picked up the story. Orphan girl takes on corporate giant to clear grandfather's name. People in Stone Creek started to talk. The man from the hardware store stopped me on the street. "Your grandfather told me about that quartz," he said, his eyes shining. "Years ago. I thought he was just dreaming. Turns out he was the only one telling the truth." Other old-timers came forward with stories of Elias, of his kindness, his skill, his quiet integrity. They brought me food at the workshop. They offered to help me patch the roof. I was no longer the strange, solitary girl. I was Elias Vance's granddaughter. I was one of them. The lawsuit is still ongoing. It will take years. But Northridge Holdings has withdrawn their offer. They have stopped trying to have the workshop condemned. They know we have them. We will either win in court or they will be forced to offer a settlement so large it will be an admission of guilt. Either way, we have already won the battle for the truth. I paid the back taxes. I hired a local crew, with the help of my new friends in town, to put a new, solid roof on the workshop. The light that streams in now is clear and bright. I spend my days there, learning. I'm learning how to use his tools, how to read the grain of a piece of wood. I've started finishing the projects he left behind, and last week, I attached the head to the body of the little rocking horse. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. My inheritance wasn't the collapsing building or the hidden cash. It wasn't even the $1 million secret under the ground. My inheritance was a choice. It was the chance to trade a story of abandonment for a story of protection, to trade loneliness for community, to trade a feeling of worthlessness for a legacy of integrity. My grandfather taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build. It's a place you fight for. And that's the story of how a worthless inheritance changed my life. It taught me that the things people dismiss, the things that look broken on the outside, often hold the most value. It taught me that you have to be willing to look deeper, to trust your gut, and to fight for the truth, even when you're scared. And I want to ask you something. What is the inheritance that you carry? Not money or property, but the story, the strength, the resilience that was passed down to you. Share it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe our stories are the most valuable things we own. Thank you for listening. And if you want to be part of a community that believes in second chances and fighting for what's right, make sure you're subscribed. There are more stories to tell.